Welcome to episode 10 of PDs SEA. 10 is a big round number. It's a special occasion for us. And for episode 10, we have a new look. And that new look is a couple of things. One, it's no look. We're going to switch to an all audio podcast format. But also, our intrepid co-host, Dr. David Stahl, has moved on to greener pastures. Those greener pastures are in Palo Alto. And he's no longer a program director. But he suggested an upgrade, and I would love to present our new PDs at Sea co-host, Dr. Marianne Chen. Marianne, please introduce yourself and tell us a little about you.
Thank you so much, Bryan. I'm really excited to join the podcast and, big shoes to fill with Dave Stahl moving on to greener pastures, but excited to work with you. So I am the Residency Program Director at Stanford. I have been at Stanford for residency training, fellowship training, and then stayed on as faculty and have been involved in education since I started as a faculty, initially as the medical student clerkship director and then associate program director for the residency. And then I took over the program director role in July of 2023.
So many of us are lifers. I started at Mount Sinai, had a brief sojourn outside of the system, and came right back. I think that's pretty typical for residency program directors. Well, you've been doing this for 2 years, and I remember the 2-year mark was a period at which I felt like I started to get the swing of things. So now that you're at that same point, what would you say is your philosophy to teaching, mentorship, running a residency?
Yeah, great question. I think you're right. 2 years feels like I'm finally in the swing of things, understanding the processes involved. Things seem a little bit more smooth and easier these days than it did back in July 2023. I would say my philosophy is one of support, understanding how I can support the residents, advocating for them, making sure that their educational needs are being met, but also making sure that they have support within the system, support from each other and their colleagues, and really are at a program that they are happy both educationally but personally as well. And right now we're starting recruitment, and that's also a big part of my philosophy of the role is being kind of the person that leads recruitment, thinks about recruitment throughout the year, and really is just making sure that we can get residents that come to our program that are going to thrive.
Well, you're very good at segues because my next question was going to be about recruitment so we can get you know you better. How would you tell a new program director who's maybe starting the process that you've learned about recruitment over the past few years that maybe would have surprised you before you started?
I think that recruitment is such a big part of our role. I think we think recruitment starts in September, ends maybe when, match list comes out in March. But really, I think it's a year-long process thinking about how to change things for future years, visiting students coming in, keeping up with all of the changes with ERIS and signaling. It's a lot these days compared to, I think, before when it was pretty straightforward. There weren't many changes that were happening year to year. I also think that you need a team to do recruitment, right? It's not a one-man job. And that's been part of my discovery of the process is making sure that, we have a team that's helping in all phases of recruitment, from reviewing files to the committee and then kind of post-recruitment activities as well. But it's a really fun part of the job. I think the future of anesthesiology is so bright, and every year I'm so impressed by all the students and all their accomplishments, and it just makes it more and more challenging. So if anything, it's a great part of the job, but an even more challenging part of the job as the pool of applicants gets bigger and more diverse, and students just doing really amazing things across the country.
Well, it's a great time to be recruiting anesthesiologists. You're right. The quality and the caliber of applicants we have has been amazing. So we're going to continue with interviewing great people in the field of anesthesia education. Marianne and I might take turns, team up together to meet some people to help educators in anesthesia learn more about what's new, talk about challenges. But a great way for us to introduce our phenomenal new co-host and to give people something I know they're really interested in is to just to talk about the recent changes to ERIS, recruitment in this season. So we're going to dive right into talking about some of the changes that we've seen. Marianne, have you seen a change in the quantity of applications you've received this year compared to years past?
Yes, absolutely. This year, we had about a 35% drop in the number of total applications compared to last year. Thinking about when we first started signaling, the applications dropped just slightly last year compared to the year before, but this was the most significant drop that we've seen since signaling was implemented, which I think speaks to what we wanted to accomplish with signaling and having applicants really focus on the 15 programs that they were truly, truly interested in. Did you guys see a similar drop in applications, Bryan?
I think your numbers track my numbers exactly. So we peaked at about 2,000 applications a few years ago, either the year prior to or the first year of signaling before we had the tiered signaling. However, we're down to about half of the number of applications almost from that peak. From a program director's point of view, it does make things easier, but it's not just about the ease. It really allows me to dig in and do a much more thorough review of those applications, which provided a signal to tell me that those applicants were, before the process, I'm more interested in my program. Do you feel the same way?
I agree. I think that when we were having thousands of applications to review, it was hard to determine how much depth we could really review each of those because of time restraints, right? We get applications in September. We need to start interviewing and sending out invites by October. But with the drop in applications and the signaled applications particularly, it allows multiple reviewers to look at it, and it gives us a little bit more time to truly understand the applicant as much as we can by going through the application in as much depth as we can.
So we do have the ability to spend more time on each application. Do you think it's speeding up the process, or are we getting invites out? Are you getting invites out faster than before? Has it changed the timeline process you go through very much?
It hasn't changed our timeline. If anything, it's allowed more faculty to review each file. So we're getting multiple reviewers for each file doing it, but giving the reviewers more time to spend reviewing the file instead of feeling rushed to get through the 100 files they need to review in a short amount of time. Did you guys notice a change in your experience reviewing files and the timeline?
I have to be honest. This is my 11th or 12th year of reviewing applications. And over the years, I've gotten pretty streamlined in my process. It really allows me to open up that pile of gold signals. And, I can look at what are pretty sensitive and specific indicators of someone that we're going to be interviewing. And I can honestly get a pile of invites out the door within the first 24 to 48 hours, just because I know what I'm looking for. After that, we do have to embark upon a much more intensive process of having our committee review the applications. But it's helped me up front, and we utilize, and I think a lot of programs, tell me if you do or not, like a rolling invite system. I don't like to knock it all out because you never know who's going to reach out. You might have something pointed out to you in an application. How about you? Is that similar in any way to your process?
Similar. We also do rolling invites as well. I'm jealous of you being able to look at so many applications and get them out so quickly. One day I will get there. But we do rolling applications. We focus initially on our gold applications and then our silver. And what I've learned over the years is that faculty, despite having kind of the same mental model on a recruitment committee, can score applications very differently. So having multiple faculty has helped understand how each of those faculty score, and I think also allows for a broader kind of look at each application and probably a more fair process when we're looking at these applications and reviewing them.
How big is the group of people that review applications for you?
We have about 8 faculty that review the applications, and then a committee of about 24 that does interviews.
Do you involve any residents, chief residents, or any other resident designations to help with the process?
Our chief residents are involved in each of our interview days and will interview all the applicants, but they do not participate in the reviewing of files ahead of time.
You mentioned the tiered signals, and I know there's a lot of angst and debate about the number, the tiering in itself, whether should we have a third tier or the distribution. I guess one of the most important things to think about when we talk about that is how useful maybe they are to us. And, we're representing 2 specific training programs. Last I heard, Stanford was a highly competitive program. I'm pretty sure that's still the case. We tend to be fairly competitive. Do you have a sense this year about the distribution, or how I'd say the hit rate? Like what percentage of gold signals that you received do you think will receive an interview? And how about silvers? Is that information you have yet or you're comfortable sharing?
I don't have specific numbers. I can give you some estimates based on what I assume based on thinking about the applications and how many invites we had. Interestingly, even though the total number of applications dropped, the number of signaled applications was relatively the same as last year. And the breakdown of gold and silver also relatively the same. I think it was about 60% gold and 40% silver of the total signaled applications. Of the gold, I would say we probably interviewed about 40% of them. And then of the silver, probably 30. I don't know if my math is adding up correctly, but I can share the numbers once I get them a little bit more definitively. But that is kind of my estimate based on looking at files so far. Yeah. How about yourself?
Well, the applicants are really trying to read our minds. So I'm just going to tell you what's in my mind and then actually dig a little bit more with you. So we also had fairly similar breakdown in terms of the percentage of gold and silver. Our gold signals, I think about 60% received an interview, and our silver is less than 3%. But maybe I approach that in a very different way. When I'm looking at a silver signal, I'm saying to myself, with the information that I have, before the whole process, there's 5 programs out there that you already think are more preferred. I know that maybe they're thinking, they're going to use some on safety programs, but I don't have that information, so I just have to assume. The interviews are a high resource process that we go through. We pull our chief residents out of ORs, other residents, speak with everyone, faculty. We do it, but it's a lot of work and effort. So we really want to make sure that the people we're talking to are going to be, high yield people. Do I think I can convince a silver signal applicant to come to my program by sharing new information and getting to know us better? Absolutely. However, that hit rate's going to be lower. And I want to look at more people and get to know them better to find a group of people that I think would be a great fit who already are more inclined to come. That is a bit of, there are some assumptions I'm making there. However, I think about your program. Stanford. It's, I think, widely considered a top tier program. It's the kind of place where you get that match letter. You can show it to your grandma, your mom, your dad. Everyone's so proud of you. So I wonder if your thought process is different. I think the same about maybe the Harvard programs. Do you have more confidence that when you invite a silver signal applicant, you're going to have an easier time convincing them that Stanford's the best place for them, that maybe someone like me from, I don't want to call my program mid-tier. I think it's a great program, but with less name recognition might expect?
That's a great question. And I think about this a lot. When I think about the silver versus the gold, I also wonder the difference between being your 5th gold versus being your 1st silver, right? So is there a big difference between you thinking of my program as 5th versus 6th? But it's a big difference when you then actually label it as gold or silver to the program director and to the programs. I've tried to look at historic data the past few years to guide the process a bit more, because I do think that if somebody is signaling us silver and we're maybe 6th, that I could, they could come. I think, provide a lot of information, highlight our program in a way that may convince them that they want to come to Stanford and train with us when they finalize their match list. Thinking of previous years, we have matched about 30% silver in our total match list. And then 2 years ago, maybe I'm thinking wrong, 3 years ago, when we were just doing the signals, we actually matched quite a few folks who didn't signal us at all. I think this is when we started with the 5 signals, but still matched with us, still wanted to come to our program after interviewing with us. And I agree. I think what you're saying about the resources that are involved in the interview day, getting faculty out, getting residents out, it's a big deal for programs, and it's a lot of work and resource intensive. And so we do want to interview folks who truly are interested in coming to our program. I think based on historic data, we'll interview quite a few silvers and golds and look at them almost pretty similarly, just because we have had successful residents match with us that, maybe initially gave us a silver. And I'll ask the residents when I work with them, I'm like, oh, why did you send us a silver signal and not a gold signal? And a lot of them will tell us, it was the advice they got from their medical school advisors that they wouldn't have a chance to interview with us. So we were kind of a reach. And honestly, I think a lot of the information being shared with medical students is not consistent across programs. And so I also think that depending on where you're getting that advice, it might not be necessarily the best advice or the most accurate advice. And so also think about that when I'm looking at the gold and silvers and reasons for wanting to be in California in our general region as well.
Well, they are getting some bad advice. And so maybe we should do a better job of explaining how we think about it. The two of us are here, but maybe we can have an initiative to get that information out for applicants from all the residency training programs. I wonder if it's a selection bias, because based on what you said, I would imagine that maybe 30% of your interviews are silver signals, and then you match 30% silver. Based on what I said, a fleetingly small minority of the people I interview are silvers. And I think I've recruited about one per year out of my total cohort, which matches the percent I'm inviting. So it's maybe purely a selection bias, and maybe we are making too many assumptions about the intentions of these applicants based on how they're signaling us or our own ability to show them we're great programs. I mean, do you think, based on the few years you've done this, that there would be a good reason to change the proportion? The last thing I thought was maybe 7 gold and 8 silver. They can use a couple safeties and still confidently or appropriately signal their 5 most preferred. What do you think about the current distribution?
I think 15 total is a good number. I think that we've done well and would like to continue to see it as 15 total signals. In terms of the breakdown, I do think that having a few more golds would be nice to really differentiate between the 5, 6, 7th in your thought process of where you might want to be. So yeah, like 7 golds, 8 silvers, I think would be a nice breakdown, a little more half and half. And then I think putting more weight into that gold signal would be how I would approach it from a program director and recruitment perspective.
Well, all of the program directors at the time of this recording will be heading to Chicago to have discussions of this nature. Maybe we can nudge our leadership a little bit in that direction to consider it. But, I think as everyone who's been listening to this has heard, for us, it is helpful. I guess the last question about the numbers of signals and how it's impacted recruiting before we move on to some other topics is, did you notice or have you noticed that has impacted how far down your rank list you are going before you fill, because we're pre-selecting people more inclined to come to our program? Are you filling earlier on your rank list than previously?
Based on the data from the past 2 years, yes. I do think, though, a little bit of that change might have been COVID and going to virtual interviews. So thinking about, data from 5 years ago when we initially went to virtual interviews, applicants interviewing across the country because it was a new process. We didn't know how it would go, as well as the ability to interview across the country, even if you might think I'm not moving to California, but I have a day and I can sit in my home and interview somewhere. So why not? So I do think that with this signaling, it has made us rank or match much higher on our list than 5 years ago.
Yeah, we found the same thing. It's been dramatic, which I think gives people the sentiment or the perception that anesthesia is so much more competitive. But I think there are so many factors going into play that it's hard to make any bold claims about that. Now, you mentioned people applying from far away. I had a rule before signals that I wouldn't touch anyone with California anywhere on their application. And that's not because I have anything against California. I've lived there. It's because I know how beautiful it is and how much people like to be there. But the signals have helped me, because now if you give me a gold signal, then I don't have to play games looking for something on your application to get a sense of how much you want to come to my program. However, there's a new development this year that is designed to further help us, which is the signal explanation. Did you find that helpful in any way, Marianne?
Honestly, no. I thought that it was a little bit of looking at our website, highlighting some of the programs we have, and then maybe sharing a reason why you wanted to be here in California. But again, that comes up in the geographic preference as well. And so I felt like it was a lot of reading the same information over and over again. The one question that I did get asked a lot by students was, if I am signaling Stanford and I'm writing a short blurb about why, should I also then personalize my personal statement? And so then we saw a lot of just the same information twice. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that and how you advise students about personalizing the statement versus the signal statement.
Well, I saw fewer personalized personal statements. I couldn't say that 10 times fast. Because of the signal explanation, I also did not find it to be very helpful. We're actually going to get some insight from program directors more broadly at the upcoming AACPD meeting, and we can share that with our viewers here later. Sometimes it hurt people. And I got to be honest, sometimes they would give such a superficial signal explanation. A few times that even provided information, I'm interested in X, Y, and Z. And I would say, well, that's not our program, that it might have hurt some of them. Now, I'm a little bit loath to admit this, but the couple that probably did help them in an albeit unconscious level that I'm trying to be aware of is we did have an open house, and a few people did call out, name me or name the residents that I had present and talk about how they perceived it. And I think we're all a little vain and try to avoid that vanity impacting our decisions. Did those help? Maybe. I'm not sure. I would like to say no, but perhaps. But probably on the whole, they didn't really change anything for me, or sometimes made the applicants look like they didn't really do their research. Did you see any of that latter point that I mentioned at all?
I do agree that a lot of them were pretty superficial. I think maybe said the similar thing for a lot of programs, but I agree that if there was somebody that they specifically wanted to work with or want to be mentored by for some of our research track folks, particularly a research PI that they'd be interested in, it did mean more, right? Actually, I think showed they took some thought, they spent some time learning about the program, identifying, exactly what makes them want to come to Stanford was nice, but otherwise it didn't offer me a lot more information that I could use when reviewing the files.
Well, in addition to asking applicants to do that, we also this year had them answer 3 new questions. I'm going to try to pull them from memory, and the fact that it's going to be a little hard might indicate the extent to which I use them. I think there was a challenge they had to overcome, a decision they made where they think they, erred and would have done it differently. And then finally, how they see their professional future. Did I get those right, Marianne?
Yeah, spot on. Nice job.
Well, did you find those to be helpful? Did they add a lot to your ability to maybe review applications, get a sense of the applicant, to know them better? Like, in any way, did they add something for you?
I wish that they could have been a little bit longer. I know that we were asking our applicants to do a lot more work these days than many years before, but I felt like they were allowed, and I don't know the exact word count, but is pretty short. You had to be very precise in your explanation of the challenge and how you overcame it, and it, because it was so short, I don't feel like it gave me a lot of insight into their approach to the challenge or, a decision made. I also think that many of them all sounded very similar. Like a decision made was most of the time medical related, which before I even read applications, I assumed it would be like applicants would write about something not medical related, but it seemed to be that perhaps the advice they're getting is to share a story from, their time on clerkships or some type of patient encounter. And then I don't love the last question about, telling me about your career. Students have been exposed to anesthesia at one place. They know one model of practice. They have not fully experienced the specialty to understand what a career might truly look like in anesthesiology. So I'd love to, 4 years from now when the residents graduate and we have this to compare what they wrote versus what they're actually going to do. And I'm sure for probably 100% of them, it's going to be absolutely, completely different. I just don't think they have the background yet in anesthesiology to be thoughtful about that response and to think truly what the different careers in anesthesiology might look like.
I totally agree. When I first started reviewing the applications, I didn't feel like it was adding anything for the review process. So, we actually finalized our selection of applicants. It probably did not sway us, but after you select them, you do a deep dive into their application. You want to get prepared for a meaningful interview while you're talking to them. I would say that in that process, I did find some utility. I don't know if it justifies having them do all the extra work. You want to have something to talk to someone about. And sometimes they will give you an anecdote that is interesting, that is a starting point for a conversation to get to know them better. I totally agree with you about them trying to make things medical. A couple of applicants who rotated with us, or students in my home institution, asked me about that specific topic. Should they be medical? And I strongly encourage them not to make it medical unless that's the honest, most challenging thing they've overcome. So we'll say it here. We really want to get to know you. We would love to be here about something non-medical. In fact, when I'm interviewing, I'm almost always trying to tread beyond the medical realm to get to know you better. I did find some utility in the final question, and you're absolutely right. I also agree. It would be like a great research study to see how many people. But it does give me a chance to, at some point in the interview, you want to relate what's offered in your program to some of their goals. And so, they talk about a potential career in education. We have education track, and we can talk about that, or potential career in one of the subspecialties, and we can speak to either the experience in our program, a fellowship we might offer, the match results for people going to that subspecialty. So it does help me in the process of interviewing, try to make that a meaningful interview where I can do the best I can to speak to what their goals are. I don't know if all of that warrants the extra work and angst we're putting applicants through. I guess a hard yes or no question. Are those questions worth it for the extra work we're putting the applicants through? Just what's your take? This is a single take.
I would say no.
Well, we're going to be talking to all the program directors in Chicago in a few days, and we'll see if we are in the minority or the majority. Before we wrap up this episode introducing you in this new era of PDs at Sea, kind of a big picture question. We are at probably the peak of popularity for anesthesiology. Now, I'm a bit of a youngin' over the course of our profession's entire history, but I think this might be the most popular that anesthesiology's ever been. How long is this going to last? Where do you see this wave of popularity going, Marianne?
I think that it's going to continue for a few years. I think that students are being exposed to anesthesiology earlier in their medical school curriculums, and they're meeting anesthesiologists early on. My sense was for many students in the past, they just never had any interaction with the field, with anybody practicing anesthesiology, and so never learned about it, never learned how awesome we are, what a great field we have. And so I actually think it's going to continue to grow. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to expand more programs and more spots across the country. And there's definitely a need for anesthesiologists to practice all across the country. And so I'm hopeful that it's going to continue to grow. And I think that, more students are hearing about it. They're learning about us early on and wanting to kind of to join the people that really love what we do.
Well, I love what we do, and that is an awesome, optimistic answer. I guess I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate just for the sake of conversation. Not that I disagree with anything you said. There's probably an aspect of exposure, and I agree. There's so many medical students that get exposed to anesthesiology and say, wow, this is so much cooler than I thought. You're not just putting people to sleep. That being said, I do think there's some economic aspect. There's a shortage, that overall shortage, the supply-demand mismatch is driving up compensation. And as much as I'm sure every single person graduating medical school is guided by nothing but pure altruism, there might be some role of the shocking compensation packages being offered to, I'm sure, your graduates and my graduates. I've seen, this is purely my perception, and I could be wrong. I don't have any numbers to back it up. I feel as though there's mild, ever so mild tightening purely in the market directly around New York City. This year, I just felt a little tiny bit. None of my residents had a hard time finding jobs at all. I think we train great residents and there's a good reputation, but I felt a smidge of tightening, which one might expect in a really desirable market like New York City that would precede an overall national. I know there's a huge shortage still nationally. Have you perceived anything in what I would assume your market's also fairly desirable?
I think our market's still very hot, really great compensation packages, both in private practice as well as academics right now within the Bay Area of California. I do think that payment models are changing. There's going to be differences and unexpected changes in compensation from insurance, Medicare, Medi-Cal, which may make those packages not as enticing, but I still think that the job market's going to be hot for many, many years.
I agree. I think that people are going to have no problem finding jobs nationally. And also remember, anyone listening to this, this podcast is aimed at people who are educators in the field of anesthesiology, although I suspect that people looking to enter the field of anesthesiology may be listening to us. Remember, our job is still the most fun you can have in the hospital every single day. I love what I do. I don't know a single anesthesiologist that I interact with on a regular basis who doesn't absolutely love the job we do, and thank heavens that they went into this profession. So while we might be talking about economics and everything, remember, you got to like what you do, and all of us do. I think this was a pretty good first stab at our new format and having a new pair of co-hosts. What do you think, Marianne?
Yeah, this is great. This is fun. Also, I think both of us are sharing our opinions, but like you said, program directors across the country have varying opinions. And so we'll share as much as we can from the broader country and programs across the country. But yeah, this is great. Thanks so much, Bryan, for inviting me. And I look forward to doing more in the future.
Great. Thanks a lot. And with that comment, we will drop the PDs SEA email address. You can email us, give us suggestions or ideas for people to whom you would like us to speak or topics you want us to speak upon. Expect to see and hear more from us. And welcome, Marianne. It's great to have you on board.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us on PDs SEA. If you found this conversation valuable, we invite you to subscribe and share the podcast with colleagues who are committed to advancing anesthesiology education. You can access additional episodes and resources from the Society for Education in Anesthesia at seahq.org. We welcome your questions and suggestions for future episodes. Please contact us at pdsatsea@seahq.org. This podcast is produced by the Stanford AIM Lab on behalf of the Society for Education in Anesthesia. Thank you for your dedication to teaching the next generation of anesthesiologists. We'll see you next time on PDs SEA.